Well, the winter event is now live, and it's more than just a pretty weather layer. Not only did the new challenges arrive, with the usual theme skins and other unlocks, but also a new mechanic. The mechanic is not only visual, it also adds a layer of things to add to your checklist to make sure you keep going. So whether you're running around like someone with their hair on fire, or those of you who like to be a bit more tactical, we have a new forecast in the works. The cold front's here, and you'll need to keep an eye on it. In today's forecast, cold and snow, folks. Cold and snow. Now, I generally wait no more than a day to make a video about events or DLC or some other update. This gives me a full day to experience them and to get a feel for what's what. So I'm aware a vast majority of you know what's about to happen in this video and what I'm going to talk about. But if you keep watching, I appreciate that very much. Okay, so here's what I observed across several rounds in the game. Firstly, the new mode came with the usual fanfare of features. Well, only one feature I can confidently report. The glaring feature is some players experience an issue connecting to the mode after backing out of it. The main menu selections were just not responding to clicks. EA did make an announcement that it was looking into this at the time I made this video. A simple yet slightly inconvenient workaround was just your typical IT first step in troubleshooting. Turn it off and turn it on again. That's right, just close the game, wait a moment, and then fire it back up. You may have to do this every time you back out of a match, but keeping the game up on. This could be a real pain in the ass if you're squatting up with friends and either need to take a break or everyone wants to find a new server. And I was affected by this feature, but I didn't notice anything else. However, I did notice it affected everything on the menu, not just the winter event modes. Now, in the game, the new cold mechanic was immediately there as soon as the timer to start ran out and the match began. The cold mechanic is persistent. It drains health steadily once you're exposed, and stepping indoors doesn't make it go away. You can't just go inside a building and wait for the health bar to go back up or for the snow blindness to fade away. Oh no, it's not going to be that simple. And if you're wounded or not wounded, the cold effect isn't immediately noticeable. It took me about 3 or 4 rounds to realize you do start shivering immediately. Like your hands are shaking when you sit still. So I thought that was kind of cool and interesting. However, when you exchange bullets with someone and win, your health does not return in full, even if you throw down a medbag or find one and sit on it. The medbag only replenishes the health lost in the exchange, not from the weather. If you started the exchange at full health and took some hits, the cold prevents a full recovery, even over time. And the only way to get back to full health and remove the narrowing vision is to find a fire barrel and get close to an incendiary grenade after it pops without getting too close to burn. So, basically fire.
Fire!
This isn't warmth of the zone, this is a pressure system. You're working against a background condition that keeps ticking until you actively counter it. And right now, that counter isn't medical supplies or interior spaces or even class equipment. It's fire.
Fire!
These fire barrels can be found throughout several areas of the map, so they're not hard to find. Just get close to it and hang for a second or two. There's even a challenge for it, like 300 seconds warming up, getting all toasty. But once you step away from the barrel, the cold mechanic resumes its work. It's pretty simple and so far consistent, and I kind of like it. For the first time in a long time, Battlefield added an environmental mechanic that adds a little bit of flavor, and I immediately noticed from some players that they absolutely hated it. The interesting part isn't that the cold drains your health. It's that the cold forces players to new movement patterns. And that's the part about some players hating it. Some players are calling this mechanic annoying and unnecessary, but the frustration isn't actually about the cold. It's about friction. Battlefield 6 has been built to be very fast, very fluid shooter. The cold is the opposite of that. It slows people down. It adds hesitation. It makes you think about your route instead of sprinting to the next dopamine hit. Players who rely on hyper-aggression feel like the mechanic gets in the way. Players who rely on sitting still feel like they're being pushed out of their spot in their comfort zone. Players who want a predictable health loop don't like the nature has entered the conversation. But friction isn't bad. Friction forces adaptation. Friction is what creates those tiny little decisions. Heat or cover, flight or reset, push or recover, that build memorable matches. And honestly, I think friction is healthy for a game that wants to slow down the speed demons and give tactical players something to chew on. A lot of players could misread the timing of this mechanic at first because it doesn't announce itself the way a storm or gas zone does. There's no immediate sound cue, no flashing UI element, and no big atmospheric shift. The cold just starts. Quietly. You don't feel the pressure until you're already in a weak position. That's the part that could throw players off. Unlike a traditional hazard system, the cold doesn't punish you instantly. It punishes you gradually. And because the penalty is gradual, you forget you're losing the fight before the firefight even happens. So, take note, the cold mechanic is universal. It doesn't care what class, gadget, or operator you're using. Everyone is affected in the same way at the same speed. But different playstyles run into it differently. If you're the type who likes to sit on a ridge and farm long shot picks, the cold is a new timer on your position. Stay too long, and even if nobody pushes you, yet you're already weakened from the moment they finally do. This is why some gunfights might feel a little off at the start of this event. You entered them thinking you're at full power. You're not. You walked into an engagement already wounded and didn't realize it. And that's what makes this mechanic clever. It's the first environmental system in a Battlefield game that attacks your assumptions, not just your health bar. Veteran players who normally settle into long-range fights feel pressure to rotate. The death cam gives your position away. Rush-heavy players can overextend and pay for it if they aren't careful in normal conditions. The speed demons can just zip through angle after angle. Not with this new cold mechanic. If you do any amount of camping, you gotta find these barrels first and settle in from them. Random building hopping doesn't save you anymore. Positioning has to consider temperature, not just cover. The speed freaks might now add the fire into their zipping rounds. Fire barrels become micro-objectives. They're not marked, they're not called out, but players will still need to mark them in their head while navigating the map. It creates tiny pockets of conflict that can feel organic. That's rare in an event design. This is the first weather system in Battlefield 6 that actually changes the map instead of decorating it. Here's the bottom line if you're playing tonight. You will lose fights you normally win if you ignore the cold mechanic. I saw it myself. Push too far from a heat source, take chip damage over time, and you show up in the next firefight at a disadvantage you didn't realize you had. The vision narrowing helps remind you, even if you miss the warning message that pops up. Several players need to think differently in this mode. The medbags treat wounds, but not the cold. Squad leaders need to call rotations that intersect with heat sources, even if that route feels slightly out of the way. And everyone needs to make sure that where these barrels are, especially if they get separated from the squad. And aggressive players need to pace their breaks between fights because keep pushing now has a literal temperature tax. And the atmosphere helps sell all of this. The snow effect is strong, visual, but not intrusive. It's immersive without becoming a whiteout gimmick, but only so much. You hear your character breathe and cough, but you don't see your breath on the screen like you would in real life, so there's some immersion missing. And Battlefield has had snow before. I think every title has, if not most of them. But they were just simply aesthetic. There hasn't been, that I could think of, a cold-draining health element. It was just snow. The last time I played a game that did snow well was Tom Clancy's The Division. Even with a very rough launch, The Division did the atmosphere in the snow extremely well. When you were playing the normal game mode, the weather didn't affect your health, as you had winter gear on. The survival game mode, however, did. And the cold mechanic in Battlefield 6 reminded me of that. After playing several rounds, it's clear this mode could be more than just a festive add-on. It could be a mode that rotates all year long, if EA and DICE wanted it to be. This same system could anchor a year-round rotation across multiple modes, too. It could replace the Red Sect Ring of Fire concept entirely, swap out heat for cold, swap flame pressure for freeze pressure, and suddenly you have a survival loop that actually feels grounded. It could also live permanently in Portal as an environmental modifier, the same way fog and night cycles quietly change how people play. And if the developers ever decide to tie gear or uniforms into resisting the cold, that's a progression layer waiting to happen. For now, though, the winter event does one thing remarkably well. It changes the fight without changing the game. And that's the kind of design Battlefield needs more of. Understated, environmental, and quietly shaping every decision you make on the ground. The snow effect is pretty good in my opinion. Basic snow visuals are manageable in video games and can be highly realistic. Interactive snow, however, requires advanced algorithms and significant computation resources, making it a noticeably complex element in game development. So, I don't think we're going to see too much of an update with this mechanic, as the Frostbite engine, I don't believe it was designed for this kind of mechanic on an interactive level. We could, however, and most likely see it in the future, perhaps in Battlefield 7. Who knows? I've seen weirder shit than in my time. But, overall, I like this snow and cold action going on. I was pleasantly surprised for once. If EA or DICE wanted to, the cold mechanic could be the beginning of a much broader environmental system. We already have sandstorms, snow, and fog and nighttime lighting, but none of those actually affect your survivability. Adding a health-impacting element open doors, heat waves that affect recoil or weapon spread, electronic storms that disrupt minimap or gadgets, heavy wind that impacts bullet velocity or throwables, hazardous fog that forces short-range engagements, cold zones that shift dynamically from match to match. I mean, we've had some of these things before. They tried to do it in 2042. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for Battlefield 6. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not about turning Battlefield into a survival game. It's about grounding the world in something felt, not just something seen. If Battlefield 6 Winter Event is the test case, it proves players can handle and even enjoy a layer of environmental decision-making that isn't gimmicky or overbearing. And that's an encouraging signal for Battlefield 7 or future modes. I'm very interested in hearing your take on the winter event, so please drop the comments, folks. Thanks for watching and sticking around until the end. Remember, please, check the video description in the military for the military veteran spotlight info. For December, I'm spotlighting DAV, Disabled American Veterans. Please check the link to see if it's something you'd be interested in supporting. Thanks. Until the next one, out.